Hi, my name is Toby Pierce, and I'd like to share a devotional thought with you today. We're continuing our journey through the book of Acts, and today we are in Acts chapter 24, if you'd like to follow along. Last time, as we ended up chapter 23, it was where the Roman tribune Lysias had sent Paul from Jerusalem to Caesarea. Because of a very real threat on Paul's life, Lysias had also sent 470 military men with Paul to guard him and keep him safe. Well, 400 of the men went about halfway. They were on foot. They went about halfway and then returned back to Jerusalem. But the other 70 were on horseback, and Paul was on horseback, and they continued all the way to Caesarea. At Caesarea, Paul is presented before the Governor Felix, and that's kind of where we're going to be today. The Jews that were causing the whole stir had hired what today we would call a prosecuting attorney. His name was Tertullus, and they hired him to kind of present their case against Paul. But even with this very eloquent man, look at how weak their case is against Paul. Acts 24, beginning in verse 1. And after 5 days, the high priest Ananias came down with some elders and a spokesman, one Tertullus. They laid before the governor their case against Paul, and when he had been summoned, Tertullus began to accuse him, saying, "Since through you we enjoy much peace, and since by your foresight, most excellent Felix, reforms are being made for this nation, in every way and everywhere we accept this with all gratitude. But to detain you no further, I beg you in your kindness to hear us briefly. For we have found this man to be a plague, one who stirs up riots among the Jews, among all the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. He even tried to profane the temple, but we seized him. By examining him yourself, you will be able to find out from him about everything of which we accuse him." The Jews also joined in the charge, affirming that these things were so. So they accused Paul of being a plague, of stirring up riots, and they accused Paul of being a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. Well, there's nothing in any of those accusations that would be of substance to anyone, certainly not to the Roman government. Verse 10, and when the governor, Felix, had nodded for him to speak, Paul replied, "Knowing that for many years you have been a judge over this nation, I cheerfully make my defense. You can verify that it is not more than 12 days since I went up to worship at Jerusalem. And they did not find me disputing with anyone or stirring up a crowd, neither in the temple, nor in the synagogues, or in the city. Neither can they prove to you what they now bring up against me. But this I confess to you, that according to the way, which they call a sect, I worship the God of our fathers, believing everything laid down in the law and the prophets, having a hope in God, which these men themselves accept, that there will be a resurrection of both the just and the unjust. So I always take pains to have a clear conscience toward God, toward both God and man. Now after several years, I came to bring alms to my nation and to present offerings. While I was doing this, they found me purified in the temple, without any crowd or tumult. But some Jews from Asia, they ought to be here before you and make an accusation, should they have anything against me. Or else let these men themselves say what wrongdoing they found, when I stood before the council, other than this one thing, that I cried out while standing among them, it is respect to the resurrection of the dead that I am on trial before you this day. So look at Paul's defense. Just got to Jerusalem 12 days ago. It would have taken a couple of days to get from Jerusalem to Caesarea. And verse 1 says that Paul was in Caesarea more than 5 days already. So Paul could have only been in Jerusalem for about 4 or 5 days. Paul's point is that hardly seems to be enough time to stir up a riot. Paul states that he went to Jerusalem to worship, verse 11, and to bring alms, verse 17. That was his purpose. Paul says he did not dispute with anyone or stir up a crowd to riot, neither in the city or the temple or the synagogues. I find it interesting that Jerusalem had both a temple and synagogues. Paul says that when he was presenting alms, he was purified in the temple, not causing trouble, verse 18. Paul says that the Jews from out of town, from Asia, came and stirred up trouble, and that those Jews ought to be here to say what wrongdoing they think Paul had, that he had done. And he says that regardless, that no one can prove any of the things that are being said against him, because they weren't true. Paul does affirm that it is with respect to the resurrection of the dead that I am on trial before you this day. Continuing on, verse 22. But Felix, having a rather accurate knowledge of the way, put them off, saying, when Lysias the tribune comes down, I will decide your case. Then he gave orders to the centurion that he, Paul, should be kept in custody, but have some liberty, and that none of his friends should be prevented from attending to his needs. So Paul's kept in prison, but it's okay to have visitors. The next section is interesting in that we learn some things about this Roman governor, Felix. Verse 24. And after some days, Felix came with his wife Drusilla, who was Jewish. And he sent for Paul and heard him speak about faith in Christ Jesus. And as he reasoned about righteousness and self-control and the coming judgment, Felix was alarmed and said, go away for the present. When I get an opportunity, I will summon you. At the same time, he hoped that money would be given him by Paul, so that he sent for him often and conversed with him. When 2 years had passed, when 2 years had elapsed, Felix was succeeded by Porcius Festus, and desiring to do the Jews a favor, Felix left Paul in prison. Well, what does history record about Felix? Felix was the Roman governor of Judea from approximately AD 52 to 59. He was unusual in that he had once been a slave. He and his brother Paulus were freedmen who rose to be under great influence under Emperor Claudius. The Roman historian Tacitus gives perhaps the most famous description of Felix, saying, he exercised the power of a king with the mind of a slave. Tacitus portrays Felix as corrupt, as cruel, and as self-serving. Josephus records Felix as being violent, as accepting of bribes. This goes along right there with what we just read. And Josephus says that Felix made use of assassins to keep his power. But verse 24 mentions Felix's wife Drusilla. Well, Josephus records that Drusilla was the daughter of Herod Agrippa I, and so brother sister of Herod Agrippa II. Josephus says that Felix had persuaded Drusilla to leave her first husband and marry him, which caused a scandal among the Jews. Josephus records that serious riots erupted between the Jews and Gentiles in Caesarea, where Felix was governor. The Jewish leaders complained to Emperor Nero. So we've got Nero involved now. And Felix was recalled to Rome to answer the charges of misgovernment. So according to Josephus, Felix escaped punishment largely because his brother, Paulus, was influential and intervened. That goes right along with Luke's statement that Felix wanted to leave Paul in prison to keep some favor with the Jews when he departed office. Well, some lessons we can learn from chapter 24. Keep a clear conscience. Paul talked about having a clear conscience, verses 10 through 16. Stand for the truth without compromise. Paul stood for the things that were true. He was not afraid to face the things that he had done. Verses 14 and 15. And then live your life focused on the resurrection. Verse 15. Be prepared to defend your faith. Verses 10 through 21. We should all be ready to defend the things that we believe. Let the gospel change your life. And don't delay obedience. Verse 25. Felix listened to Paul very often, but he did not let it soak in. And then guard against the love of money. Verse 26. You should focus on souls. Don't let money control you in your decisions. And remain faithful when justice is delayed. Verses 26 and 27. Felix kept Paul in prison for 2 years while Felix was governor, and then left him there when he left office. In verse 25, Paul taught about righteousness, self-control, and the coming judgment. Righteousness. We're to live right. Self-control. With God's help, we're to master our desires. And judgment. We're to live knowing that we are accountable before God. I hope you have a blessed day.
If you would like more information, or if you'd like to participate in our Bible studies and worship services, we would love to have you come join us at the Northeast Church of Christ in Albuquerque, New Mexico.